Okay, Internet, I have been working on a new project, more like an updated project, making better molds for my dice. Now, I haven't peaked yet. I have not, because I've started trying to make it with this clear silicone, which you can tell is not super clear when you just let it cast in the air. It is very much not clear, but it is better than the fully opaque molds I've had. And if I want to make more complex designs and insertions into dice, I need to be able to see what I'm doing. So under here is a mold that I cast under pressure, and I have not seen it yet. I pulled it out just like this. I cannot see the top through the top of my little pressure pot insert. Let's look together. That is a perfectly clear mold, and I'm going to show you how to make them. Now, the process we're using for this set of molds is basically an upgraded and refined version of the original mold making techniques that I was using here on the channel that I've seen inspired by a few other channels. The big differences is we're going for a slightly more sustainable approach, and instead of using hot glue, which is a finite resource, we're just using non-sulfur molding clay, which we can use and then reuse down the line. We're also using small sections of a plastic straw, which we can again reuse to be able to have a more consistent and more normal sprue instead of these slightly irregular hot glue marks. And we've also switched from Moldstar 30 to Sorta Clear 37, which is the same general concept. It is a 1A to 1B by volume silicone mixture, but this stuff is dummy thick compared to what we've been working with before, which is a more complicated process.
Now, something that's extremely important when you're working with either silicone or resin is having an accurate mixture of part A to part B. You know, this and this. You have to mix them together equally, and most cups that are going to allow you to do this, whether it be plastic ones like this or silicone-based mixing cups, which are reusable infinitely, which I'm starting to switch to, is that all of the notations are usually on pretty common things like 1, 2, 3, 4, and etc. ounces. Problem is that this being on single ounces might not accurately fill 7 of these when trying to make a mold. So there's an easy way around that. Instead of relying on the graduation on these cups, we're gonna make our own by taking one of the Dixie cups, which we plan to fill for our molds, and filling it to about the same spot in water. So we have this cup mostly filled. We take this and pour it into here. And I see that one of my cups is almost exactly 2 ounces. Or in another case where I did this, you know, because this is the for film take, about 70 milliliters, which means that 3 molds would be 210 milliliters, and 6 of them would be twice that, and 7 of them would be 420 plus, hey, 420, hey, plus 70 for 490 milliliters. Now, instead of exactly calculating that out, what we could do is, if I know I'm mixing my silicone in these large plastic tubs, I can take the water that I have and add it here. Then, when I have exactly the right amount of water, grab a Sharpie and make a line. Take those lines for my own custom graduation, and I have a cup which requires no additional mixing cups to be made dirty to make a batch of molds. This is going to help you not waste silicone like this, which, while it's great for the intro of a video, is wasted resources, wasted money, and wasted product, which could have gone to something more productive like a dice mold or any other type of mold. So avoid this, do this, using this, and save more of this.
Basically, to make a mold, we are going to get a small portion of clay and fill the straw segment to make sure that that is not hollow, and it's also somewhat insulated from the thermal reaction of the silicone curing. We'll then take that one end into a small ball of clay that we will flatten out into a funnel shape, and another exposed for the corner of the dice to be pushed into. This is somewhat reliant on using sharp-edged molds. I have not yet tried this with rounded corners, but I would think that you would get similar success although it would be a little bit harder to balance on the sprue when you're first creating your molds. So I mixed the 2 parts of the silicone mixture, and the compound is just extremely thick and viscous and hard to work with. Using the graduations that we put on our container that we worked off of, I realized that I actually did the math a little bit wrong, and it wasn't 210 of each element makes 3 molds. No, 210 of the combined element makes 3, so my 3 lines really make 6, and my 6 lines would make 12. Considering the limited pot life of this, we're going to stick with the 3 lines, knowing that that basically makes us a full set of dice if I had had everything prepared. Once I have the silicone mixed, it's pouring it into each of the individual cups, cleaning up wherever I can, throwing them into the rack, and getting them into the pressure chamber. This is the same pressure pot I use for when I'm doing the actual resin casting as well, so the setup is pretty much identical. Taking that and getting it to 40 psi, really pushing it a little bit higher than I do for the dice themselves, because these are the molds and they need to stand up to repeated castings. I got everything going and pretty much had to call it a night, because it was like 2 in the morning and it's time to go to bed. And the next morning when pulling these out of the pot, just look at the difference between the silicone when it's cured at room pressure versus cured in the pressure chamber. There's just a few surface imperfections, but the overall mold is spotless. And this is the kind of mold I'm going to need to be able to cast these dice repeatedly in pressure without having to worry about surface imperfections. I started to peel this, and I don't want to take this away from you all because this is extremely satisfying. So let's just hope I can get the whole thing in one go. Now, on one hand, this is a bunch of wasted silicone, which is unfortunate. But on the other hand, it probably wasn't enough for a full mold, and it also gives us this like very satisfying moment. So just remember, that is why you don't use anything automatic, and that also cleans this out. So this is ready to go, and with the graduation marks we put on earlier, we can just reuse this. Now for our mold. I've already cut out a few of them because you guys don't need to watch me do this 7 times, so we'll do this just once. This is my D8 mold. You can see the few surface imperfections here, but that's actually pretty good considering the fact that the whole thing cast under pressure and the rest of it is just clear. So we can just ditch the Dixie cup, pull that all the way over, and we're down to, look, you can sort of give it a good look. No bubbles along the body of the thing, which is what we are most concerned with. This little bit down here, no biggie. So we can get this clay, and that's easy enough. You just roll your finger over the top of it, and you will pull all that off. And if we're lucky, yep, we can get the little straw bit with its clay. And since this doesn't react with the silicone at all, it's just good to go. So I can add it to the pile, add the straw, and we're recycling in a sense, or we're at least reusing. There is a little bit of clay down in that hole, but we'll get to that. So a nice clean here. Now, let's pull this in and show what we're going for. Since this is clear and we can manage our cuts a little bit better, here is the goal. We want to cut along the edges of the die. So that way, when we're cutting along these vertical lines in the faces. And I know it's harder to see on camera than it is in person. We do this for 2 reasons. 1, so we don't risk damaging the dice and just putting a big scratch down the face. And 2, so that way when we're lining up the dice for demolding, we don't need to worry about having things just slightly misaligned and having a huge scratch down the face of the die. Actually, I can show that. Here is one of the ones from my previous mold. This is a dice that was too defective for me to consider selling because I could never get the corner polished right, but also you see this large scratch. It's actually not a scratch, it's the dice being improperly balanced, and the 2 edges of the mold didn't perfectly line up on all 3 axes, which is why it was all wrong. So this, not what you want, but if you keep the cut right on this edge, odds are you'll have a easier to align mold. So now let's cut this sucker out, and that will be my last one. And now that I have my molds, it's time to start casting. Instead of tape, I'm using these rubber bands, which I just double up and surround the top of each individual mold, being very careful to make sure all of the individual segments that I've cut are aligned. Then it's time to mix resin. I'm using Art and Glow resin. I've had the resin portion warming up in this water bath for the whole time, and I'm going to be using these pipettes to put the resin into each individual mold. After I fail by framing myself pouring resin not once, but twice, I start stirring the resin, and this is where things take a little bit of time. You're going to want to stir this completely. Any unmixed resin will lead to an uncured dice, leading to just a bunch of goop in your hands. Once you've hit for the approximate time, about 5 minutes, it's time to add this copper mica powder and just put a whole bunch in here. It's not very scientific at this point, but stir that up and you start to get this very molten metal look and appearance. And I like the fact that the mica powder just has this natural swirliness to it. After that, I fill 2 of the pipettes with the resin and leave 1 empty, which I will use to suck out any air bubbles that I notice whenever I improperly fill a mold. You just stick the pipette all the way down in, and here's where the clear resin really comes into play, and you can just see the dye filling up as the resin is squirted down into the silicone. Switching out 1 pipette for the other, which is why 2 in the resin is a good idea. Make sure to use your stirring stick or the side of your cup to just wipe off any excess so you're not dripping resin everywhere. Now here you'll see at the very end there's this little flash when the mold is fully filled, and that's where I use that second pipette for. I repeat this process for each of the individual molds and just keep filling these things up. And it takes about 40 milliliters to fill all 7 dice. There's just a little bit extra that you might be able to get 1 extra D20, or I know some people who do extra D10s or D6s. I'm actually going to have an 8 dice set, and then it's getting them all into my insert and then getting them into the pressure pot to cure under pressure. And wow, just check out this set of dice. The reds and the browns look very Martian and otherworldly, and even though I was originally going for a copper molten metal look, a few people over on Instagram, go follow me on Loot Tables to know more about the dice making stuff, decided I should call this set Red Planet, and I totally agree. And in all honesty, I couldn't be happier right now. Well, I'd be happier if I didn't drop the dice. In all honesty, I couldn't be happier right now. These custom dice are going to really be something special. Now I still have to clean up this one sprue rough corner, which you see right there, which is where we had the sprue, and I've cut it off with clippers and trimmed it with an X-Acto knife, but it still needs sanding. That's going to be a 4th part to this video, detailing the sanding materials I use and the process and everything else that I've learned. So I have links to a bunch of the different supplies and resources, some of the tools I have around the shop, well, workshop here. The shop with the actual tools outside is a whole different story, but I will link to those. It's an Amazon affiliate link, so if you buy it through that, you help me out here on the channel, which is always nice, and I appreciate the support. This channel has grown a lot because of these dice making videos, so we'll wait and see what happens next. But the next video I'm going to be doing is a bit of a woodworking project, probably. All these dice are well and good, and we've made a case which we're probably going to sell somewhere. But wouldn't it be nice to have somewhere to roll these that was just as special and just as custom? That'll be next video, everybody. Until then, be good to each other, and I'll see you around.